Okay, so hello everybody. Today is November 19th, 2013. I am Jessica Hemans, the training coordinator here at the National Consumer Law Center. Today's webinar is Disability in Rural Communities, Making a Difference in Small Towns. Today's webinar is sponsored by the National Alliance for Rural Policy and the National Consumer Law Center. Our wonderful guest speaker today is Alicia Ashkenazi. She's the Director of Community Outreach for the National Youth Leadership Network. Just to give you a little bit more about her, she's diagnosed on the autistic spectrum and profoundly deaf. Alicia is passionate about disability rights and self-advocacy. She seeks to promote widespread understanding of the needs and rights of people with disabilities. She is the Director of Community Outreach for the National Youth Leadership Network, and she is also the Community Council Chair Research Assistant for Academic Autistic Spectrum Partnership in Research and Education, and she is a board member editorial coordinator for the Autism Women's Network. So welcome, Alicia. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Jessica, for the wonderful introduction. I feel at home. Good morning as well as good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you live. Thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. It means a lot to the organizers and me. I was informed that a good crowd of people from Elder Rights Group is in attendance, so I would like to give a friendly welcome and shout out to those folks in addition to everyone else. Again, my name is Alicia Ashkenazi, and I am the Director of Community Outreach for National Youth Leadership Network. NYLN is a nonprofit organization. We're led by and for youth with disabilities, and our staff members have disabilities as well. All types of disabilities are welcome and included in our organization. NYLN's members include individuals throughout the United States and its territories. Our areas of service focus on community building, disability pride, disability culture, advocacy, leadership, education, employment, and healthcare. At the end of this presentation, NYLN will again be listed among the resources should you wish to look us up and learn more.
Alicia, sorry to interrupt you. Can you accept the screen sharing button so we can see your slides?
Oh, okay. Let's do that.
Let me know if you need me to resend it to you.
Got it. Okay, so now, here we are.
There you go.
This was my intro slide. And here is our National Youth Leadership Network slide. I'll let everybody take a look at that for a moment before we move on. And thank you, Jessica, for letting me know that that wasn't up. Okay, so this presentation will be a 15-minute presentation or so, give or take. I'll then allow 10 minutes for a Q&A afterward. I'm going to start off with a few stories as appetizers, and then I'll get into the heart of my presentation, which will touch on why people enjoy and want to live in rural areas, how people with disabilities make rural areas more accessible, creating resources, advocacy, inclusion, interdependence, leadership, often forgotten facts about people with disabilities, and then we'll hit on some resources. So I have a significant hearing loss, and I'm also on the autism spectrum. I use a cochlear implant, and I am also fluent in American Sign Language. I have lived many places, from big cities to rural areas. As for big cities, I lived many years in Los Angeles, California, and I also lived in New York City for a few years. Currently, I live in Portland, Oregon with my husband and children, and I must say that the great rainy, wooded wonderland of Portland is the perfect mix of both rural and city for me. When I was a young girl, I lived in a rural area called Banks, Oregon for a few years. The forestry is gorgeous, and there's a lot of beautiful farmland around. I have wonderful memories of running through and playing in our wheat fields that surrounded our home, as well as trekking to the forest that bordered our property. I used to play in our neighbor's barn, swing from a tire my father had hung from a tree, and search the little creek in the forest for cute little critters to play with. Banks was a community where people depended upon each other as well as traded services. For example, my mother, an excellent seamstress, would teach sewing skills to a lady who owned a farm and had several children. In return, this lady babysat me in the mornings both before and after school. In the mornings before school and then after school in the afternoons. The grand apple orchards, fresh honey, baby cows, and lots of other things her farm had to offer were the source of hours of entertainment for her kids and me. Everyone knew or knew of each other, and we all worked as best as we could to make a warm community that was inclusive and helpful. Shortly after I graduated from high school, I moved to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho for 6 months. And I just love this photo of Coeur d'Alene. It is really one of the most beautiful places, if not the most beautiful place I've ever been to. So if you ever have a chance, you're in Idaho for some reason, go check out Coeur d'Alene. I lived in a cabin in the Cougar Gulch area, a rural setting just outside of Coeur d'Alene. In this environment, neighbors knew neighbors, and we helped each other out. Matter of fact, my husband and I were instructed to wear what were called bear bells. These bells you put around your neck, and they jingle as you walk. They were for when we trekked downhill to the mailbox so that the bears in the area would be alerted to our presence. My first memory of just how far a neighbor would go to help was when the snow came and I saw a pair of glowing eyes in the bushes just off of our porch. It was dark and I was packing groceries in from the store, and I knew those eyes belonged to a mountain lion. I was afraid the animal might attack my husband or me. If not that evening, then some other time. I got a hold of our neighbors who were longtime residents in the area, and they came up right away. Of course, they insisted. Next thing, Mr. Bunn and his grandson, guns slung over their shoulders, were prowling our property looking for bobcat tracks. They knew of my hearing loss, and they wanted me to be safe, especially when my husband wasn't home. So they brought along their dog named Cougar and left him with us for protection. Cougar was a big Labrador, and apparently he had fought off many a bobcat. Long story short, Cougar became our dog, and then my husband's parents' dog after my husband and I moved. The cabin we lived in was my husband's parents' cabin, and they moved in after having us house sit or cabin sit for those few months. Anyway, Cougar grew fond of our family, and I guess he took his bobcat protection job with utmost seriousness. Our neighbors did plenty of other things for us, like teach us how to order cords of wood for our stoves, as well as teach me how to use our wood-burning oven. That took a few good times, let me tell you. We would not have survived without our neighbors. My last experience in a rural area was living in Oceanside, Oregon, where my parents had built a house. Oceanside is near Tillamook, Oregon. Perhaps you've heard of Tillamook cheese. I believe I've seen our cheese all the way over there on the East Coast. Anyway, in Oceanside, I depended less on community and neighbors and more on vocational rehabilitation, and the disability services at Tillamook Bay Community College. That was among my first taste of interacting with community services as a teenager out of high school. Luckily, my experience was quite positive, as I was able to earn my associate's degree before moving on to Portland State University in Portland. While living in Oceanside, I held a job as an assistant to a boy on the autism spectrum. He attended a rural school in Rockaway Beach. I saw firsthand the struggles many of the kids who needed services and supports had to deal with. From interacting with their families, I learned a lot about what was and what was not working for them. But what stuck with me most is how the parents in that community banded together and filled in the gaps where services fell short. Before moving to Oceanside, I had worked at a school for the deaf and hard of hearing in Los Angeles, where significant services and supports were available. It was a huge change to move to Oceanside and experience the lack of services in the surrounding rural coastal communities. I did learn, however, that there are some things people do successfully to either create what they need or make do as they advocate for improvement in higher levels of understanding and inclusion. As for information about people with disabilities in rural areas, I cannot claim that I have magic answers that will solve the hottest issues people with disabilities face in rural settings. However, my goal for this webinar is to reiterate issues people with disabilities face, discuss some ways those issues can be addressed, as well as share a few ideas and resources that might be of help. I wish to do my part to keep this conversation going, as well as to assist in connecting people and resources to each other. I really love this photo. It makes me feel good when I look at it. When I interviewed a woman named Laura Nagel, she's on the autism spectrum, and she has a film out called Vectors of Autism. She spoke about the importance of a positive community experience. Laura lives in Cornville, Arizona, and she loves it. She feels that people with disabilities can be much more successful when they live in communities that accommodate and include them without making a big fuss about it. She noted that there are communities out there that embrace people with disabilities, and that in changing the social environment, a person with a disability can live with much more acceptance and peace, as well as even experience greater ease with life. A change in social environment can happen in both large and small towns, however. Some find it easier to accomplish in a small town atmosphere. There's a social model of disability and a medical model of disability. Let's take a look at the medical model first. Disability under the medical model, excuse me, I'm making sure that I got my slide right here. So disability is seen as a negative under the medical model of disability. It is a negative state of being. For example, someone who is following the medical model will likely view my deafness as undesirable and assume that I am desperate for a cure. In reality, though I have a cochlear implant and I use a hearing aid, I accept being deaf, and I'm even glad to be deaf. I am very sensitive to sound and easily bothered by it. My cochlear implant and hearing aid can be taken off so that I can enjoy near complete silence whenever I choose. I would not trade that for anything. This is a positive for me and not a negative. There is nothing about my state of being as a person who is both deaf and on the autism spectrum that is negative. Are there challenges? You bet. But who doesn't have challenges in life? I understand that some people with disabilities have profound support needs, and without that support, their enjoyment of life and level of empowerment can be quite low. But with supports in place, a whole new world opens. We'll cover this attitude toward disability more when we get to the social model of disability. Another way the medical model views disability is as something shameful. And it makes me really sad when I travel around the state and I'm doing presentations, interacting with youth, getting to know other people with disabilities, and I run into people who are ashamed that they have a disability or who haven't been exposed to the disability community or to disability culture or disability pride, and they don't realize that there's nothing to be ashamed of, that what's going on is that they have a lack of support and a lack of community that's embracing them. And it's a simple concept, but it's also a difficult concept, and it just depends on how you're looking at the issue. I hope that makes sense how I've said that. Anyway, the medical model views people with disabilities as deficient and or abnormal, and the remedy for disability is to make the person normal, and professionals are the only ones who know best about disability. So I would like to move on to the social model of disability. However, in looking at the medical model, it's not that someone's all medical model or all social model. There can be a mixture of someone kind of pulling from some medical model beliefs and pulling from some social model beliefs. The social model of disability.
Alicia, there's been a request if you could speak up a little bit louder. Some people are having a hard time hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, do I sound louder to you, Jessica?
You're a little bit louder now. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I apologize that I wasn't loud enough I'm glad that I was told that, and I'm sorry for those of you who may have missed what I was saying. So now we are on the social model of disability. In this model, disability is viewed as a difference and not as a negative. Being disabled is a neutral state of being. How society treats people with disabilities is directly related to disability. So for example, when society ensures that sidewalks and buildings are accessible and that information is accessible, technology is accessible, housing is accessible, education is accessible, and so on, then the impact from disability decreases significantly. Let me use myself as an example again. Though I speak and can hear some with my cochlear implant, I am still deaf. If there's too much background noise present, then my cochlear implant and hearing aids are of little to no use to me. After all, being able to speak does not mean being able to hear. Another issue related to my hearing loss is distance of speakers. Speakers who are too far will not be heard by me. When I attend meetings where American Sign Language interpreters, captioning, and seating positions are accounted for, then I am on an equal playing field with everyone else. But if I attend a meeting with none of those accommodations in place, I'm far from any level of playing ground, and the impact upon me is significant. Making things accessible for people with disabilities is crucial. Our needs as people with disabilities vary greatly, yet our goal to reach equal playing ground and to have equal access, accessibility, and respect is unified. Years of experience has taught me that the very things that help people with disabilities end up helping non-disabled people just as much or just as often. Communication between people with disabilities and society as a whole impacts accessibility and integration of people with disabilities. Right now, you might be wondering how I'm able to hear and understand Jessica, and it might interest you to know that I have an American Sign Language interpreter here with me, and she interprets. She can hear Jessica, and she interprets everything that Jessica says to me. And so that is how I'm able to hear when Jessica comes on and mentions that I need to speak louder, or mentions that my slides aren't showing, or something like that. So systemic barriers, negative attitudes, and exclusion by society, whether purposeful or not, contribute to disability and the challenges experienced by people with disabilities. No matter whether it be physical, sensory, intellectual, or neurological variations of disability, it is when society fails as a whole to consider the needs of people who are at all points on the spectrum of humanity that the challenges of disability truly begin to limit us. The remedy for disability is advocacy within society and education of society. And professionals most definitely have a place within making society and life better for people with disabilities. However, we have to remember that people with disabilities are the true experts on their lives and their support needs. I'd like to transition into why people enjoy and want to live in rural areas. There are lots of reasons people enjoy and want to live in rural areas. As for people with disabilities, many sorts of communities are good for us. For example, some of us like large cities for their conveniences, such as not having to own or drive a car. And some of us like small towns for their nearness of things, dependent upon how the town is designed, of course. Individuals with sensory sensitivities often appreciate the quietness of small towns, as large cities have so much going on that the noise and light and confusion can overload one's sensory system. Independence and interdependence are important for people with disabilities in any community. Independent living is an important concept for people with disabilities, especially when it comes to equality and living a vibrant, self-determined life. Living independently does not mean living without supports. It means living as independently as possible with meaningful supports in place. Interdependence can happen in many forms. Perhaps a person can trade teaching computer skills or even computer and internet use at their house, for help with cooking and maintaining their home. Or perhaps someone who is skilled at building things could build a ramp for a wheelchair on a person's home in exchange for a supply of wood to burn during the winter. Those are just some examples off the top of my head. So we'll move on to our next slide. So there are lots of lovely things to point out when it comes to why many people embrace and love rural areas. On the other hand, there are a lot of known challenges that simply don't come with easy answers. Lack of internet access or broadband, lack of technology, lack of reliable transportation, lack of needed supports and services, and even a lack of a town library in some cases are all things that people often struggle with in many rural areas. I'm still here. I was just thinking. Internet service, for example, is a huge assistive device for people with all kinds of disabilities. The same goes for smartphones, as a smartphone is capable of serving as an assistive communication device for those who have communication challenges. Sparse, shoddy, or non-existent mobile phone service can be a big hindrance to independence and ideal communication. But when people ask, why wouldn't someone just leave a rural area, versus facing all of those challenges, there are many valid perspectives. For example, not wanting to leave the family, town, and things that they know and love. For some people, their town is all they know and feel comfortable or safe with. Another important point is that it's not always true that better, easier solutions can only be found in big cities. It's just not. Living in a few different rural areas myself has taught me that. Then there's the consideration of why should a person with a disability, or anyone for that matter, be made to feel that living in a rural area is wrong. Is it a wrong choice to live somewhere a person loves? And is that person wrong if they have a disability and they need services in their rural area? Why has it become okay for people with disabilities to be faulted for wanting to live and thrive in a rural area and also have access to services and supports? If we support the idea that every person in every community has a right to be an equal participant, this most definitely includes people with disabilities. On another note, many people with disabilities have mentioned that living in a small community makes it easier as people recognize them as they come and go and will even meet their needs when possible. For example, a grocery store might automatically offer to assist someone who's a frequent shopper who has a disability with getting around the store shopping, or they might even be willing to set up a delivery service. Another example would be an athletic club that agrees to swap the position of two pieces of machinery in order to make an area more accessible for a wheelchair. Or perhaps a mailman is willing to give front door service for someone who has difficulty getting down to their mailbox. All of those things can be much easier to secure in a small town versus a faster paced big city. Many rural areas support a pioneer mentality where carving out one's own path in life is highly respected and encouraged. People with disabilities also want to lead independent lives and make their own decisions about how and where they want to live. Advocating for equal rights and educating people in smaller towns can be much easier than doing so in larger towns. Acceptance, equality, inclusion, and respect are all easier to cultivate when a community is smaller and much more connected, when people know each other or know of each other or know someone who knows that person. It becomes much more interdependent. So, some common needs for people with disabilities in rural areas. Connections for Centers for Independent Living and other disability-serving organizations are of extreme importance. Rural Centers for Independent Living bring independent living to people with disabilities who are living in rural areas. I'm going to talk more about Centers for Independent Living in my resource section. Peer and family support systems such as peer-run support groups and organizations are needed in rural areas as well. For example, National Youth Leadership Network is currently working with a few different rural areas around the state to engage youth, support them, mentor them, and empower them to take leadership positions within their rural communities. Peer-run groups can happen as simple as youth with disabilities in a small town banding together and coming up with a mission, such as pooling ideas and resources, as well as gaining leadership positions within their town so that they can make meaningful changes for people with disabilities. I also want to note that while I keep mentioning youth, it's because I work for National Youth Leadership Network. However, a lot of things that I'm mentioning for youth applies to people of any age and at any point in their life. This webinar is for people with disabilities, about people with disabilities, and for their families and supporters and such. So please know that when I stress youth, that this can be applied in many, these ideas and these things that I'm saying can be applied in many situations. Public transportation throughout rural areas is always a hot topic, and I just don't have any magic answers. However, I do have a resource listed, which I will revisit toward the end of this webinar. Here is an idea, though, where interdependence can be applied. Perhaps a family with an accessible van can offer a ride to a place or to a service of some sort in exchange for something they're in need of. That's what my experience has been in rural areas, is exchanging one thing for another. There's that, I've never really liked this saying, but for some reason it popped into my head, like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Personally, I've given rides in exchange for good old gas money or help with computer skills or even babysitting. Flexible work environments and vocational services for job carving and creation are another area of need for people with disabilities in rural areas. Volunteering within the community, as well as connecting with the vocational rehabilitation office, can be extremely helpful to people with disabilities when it comes to gaining meaningful employment. This is the route that I took, was going through vocational rehabilitation, and I would not be where I am today doing what I do if it weren't for the wonderful 3 different offices of vocational rehabilitation that I've used in the state of Oregon and even in California. I've been very lucky with that, and even in a rural area when I was living in Oceanside, VR really had my back, and I appreciate that. I have a vocational rehabilitation reference in my resources. However, you can type in a search engine on the internet your state and the words vocational rehabilitation to begin exploring what your state offers and what is nearest to you. I have a friend who worked for a vocational rehabilitation office as a case manager, and they often told me and stressed vocational rehabilitation really differs across the states. One state might be able to provide excellent services, whereas another state might not really have much, or may have a waiting list, or other things that can be frustrating. So that's something to keep in mind. In my case, again, my most meaningful jobs have come from volunteering first. I volunteered at one place for 3 years before I was finally offered a job. While volunteering, I learned so much that I became indispensable, meaning they didn't want to get rid of me because I knew how to do so many things. I ended up earning a fabulous salary and gaining much-needed independence. And I treated my volunteer position like a job that I was being paid for. And with perseverance, it became a job. So I really want to give a shout-out for volunteering, because that has been a significant help in my life. People with disabilities need affordable and accessible housing options. This is an area where some self-advocates can get involved in their towns in order to get the word out about the importance of this, as well as affect legislation and laws in favorable ways. So for example, National Youth Leadership Network, we have some self-advocates in different states and rural areas. Perhaps if one of them were to pick, hey, we really want to work on accessible housing options, we want to affect legislation and laws, we want to educate people about the importance of this, we want to make a change here in our community, this is something that National Youth Leadership Network can say, okay, this is how we're going to do this, let's come up with a plan together, what do you guys want to do? This is something that anybody can apply anywhere, picking something and then deciding as a group what can you do about it, who can help lead, who can help mentor, all those types of things that go into making things happen. Accessible recreational activities are another common need. Some rural towns offer a free bus ride to a community center or a health club a few times a week. This is another thing self-advocates can get together and start advocating for if there's a lack of this in their towns. Though it can seem impossible to make changes, either big or small, it's important not to give up hope. When things get tough or impossible, research online how other small towns made something work. Reach out to other self-advocate people, organizations, and ask them, hey, what have you done to address this problem in your town? If, sometimes you can use a working model that someone else has set up instead of reinventing the wheel and apply it to your own situation. I truly believe in a saying, where there's a will, there's a way. Again, advocacy, support, mentorship, and leadership are paramount for people with disabilities in both rural and metropolitan areas. It's about getting together and making things happen. For example, if your town has a library with internet access, perhaps the library can host a monthly get-together for people with disabilities and even allow an hour or so of use of all of their computers by a self-advocacy group so that they can watch a disability-related webinar, such as what I'm doing now. So in my head, I'm imagining some library in some rural area in the States saying, hey, we'd like to host your self-advocacy group, to come watch this disability-related webinar. We're going to let you guys use these computers for an hour so you can watch this webinar. We'll help you. We'll offer assistance. These are the types of things that I've seen happen and work very well for people. If they have, they could even have a meeting with another self-advocacy group in another rural town and discuss the issues going on and how their towns are similar or different. And I'm guessing that you guys are thinking, but what about transportation? How am I going to get to the library? And again, it's a hard answer, but if you have a self-advocacy group, you can aim to get as many people to the destination as possible. How do you include those who can't make it? One idea is to consider if there's a conference phone line that those who cannot attend in person can be a part of. So can you have a conference phone line set up at the library or the town hall or community center or someone's house maybe? Is there something wherever you're holding this get-together? Perhaps a volunteer could type up notes from the self-advocacy meeting and then share them via email with those who couldn't make it. Or if they don't have email, perhaps someone could divide up who's going to call who were unable to attend so that they can be filled in on the progress and so that their comments can be gathered and shared at the next meeting or get-together. Another idea is to take turns hosting the meetings at different advocates' houses. If someone's unable to leave their home due to transportation issues or whatever have you, that's another idea. Again, these are all ideas I'm tossing out from the top of my head. However, it's the advocates in each rural community that have the power to figure out how to make things work with the guidance and support they're able to secure. Now, forgive me if this sounds a little bit corny, but sometimes a community just needs like a cheerleader, not an annoying cheerleader, but just someone to say, come on, we can do this, guys, or someone to breathe fresh air, fresh life into things. People have all sorts of stresses going on in their lives, or when you are lacking support that is stressful. And it's hard to take on something and say, okay, what are we going to do about this when your own needs aren't even taken care of or accounted for at that time, or you don't have the support. However, I promise that when just even getting together with one other person or knowing somebody else or having some sort of correspondence can start to open up doors and get ideas going and brainstorming going, and things really can happen, big and small, that are meaningful. Also worth mentioning is the importance of up-to-date information. All places servicing people with disabilities, such as schools, ER offices, or whatever have you, can serve people best when their info is up to date. This could be a great area to volunteer in. It's something that would personally appeal to me. So if you're a self-advocate and you happen to notice that your school or your local disability organization is lacking up-to-date resources, perhaps you could step in and say, hey, my name is such and such, or maybe you already know them and there need not be any introduction. You could volunteer to update things, or if you have internet access, you could bring information that you would like to see this place offer and run it by them and work together. It could be something a self-advocacy group could work on together as well. Okay. Relationships and skill trading are often as good as gold in rural areas. Skill trading, correspondence, outreach, networking, education, and shared resources go hand in hand with effective advocacy. Networking and communicating is about getting in touch with others who are like-minded or in the same situation as you, and you share your wants and needs with each other, brainstorm together. There are people who can and will connect you with other people or places to check out in regards to services and support. Many of them can be found online via research and resources. Self-advocates from neighboring towns can host meet and greets at community centers or libraries, as I've mentioned, town halls, or even someone's house. You can start a self-advocate-run support group that's open to all people with disabilities. That's another way to get high participation and high energy, is to not be afraid to open your group up to include all people with disabilities, disabilities of all kinds, and then use accommodation within your group. How can you accommodate everyone who's coming? How can you be sensitive to everyone who's coming? What do you need to learn about each person's needs so that each person feels comfortable attending and feels that they can be a part of something too? How can you ensure that no matter what someone's disability is, how can they participate? How can everybody work together so that everyone can use whatever skill it is that they have to offer in helping the self-advocacy group be successful? Another good way to access information and help is to invite someone from like a Center for Independent Living to come, or a vocational rehabilitation office. It's as you could have someone send an email and say, we're a self-advocacy group in such and such area. We'd love to know more about independent living. Is there anyone there who could come and speak to us? Or perhaps you know of someone who's been successful at becoming independent. Could they come talk to our group? Have self-advocates come talk to your groups, or have people from, come talk to your group. If they can't attend in person, maybe they can write an email to your group that outlines some points and answers some questions that your group members have. The email can be shared at one of your meetings so that all can be a part of the learning that will come from it. As for getting involved with communities, again, self-advocates can lobby for and serve on local advisory committees or boards and have a voice in the systems that serve them. This is something that, believe it or not, some people don't realize. You don't have to be somebody with a big old name badge and a big giant hat to get involved with advisory committees or becoming a board member for something. If you can volunteer and if you're willing to learn, and Some of the challenges you might face might be educating people about disability and educating them about how people with disabilities have a place there too. Their voice counts too. Those are some of the things you may run in that are challenging in that area. However, there is strength in numbers. And if you have a group, a self-advocacy group, or if you have even just one friend, and you can go and you can speak up at whatever it is that your town is doing that could impact you, or what they could change that could help you. The goal often comes with needing a person who is familiar with how to educate organizations and local government on the importance of including the voices of people with disabilities. Matter of fact, self-advocates can band together, show up at town meetings, voice how important it is to listen to and respect the voices and opinions of people with disabilities. I apologize if I'm repeating myself sometimes. I get excited and tend to say the same thing in a few different ways. As for locating or creating a resource directory, a Center for Independent Living or a Chamber of Commerce may already have a listing that shows resources and connections for individuals with disabilities and their families. Sharing what is learned is another one of my favorite ways to get involved as a self-advocate. I like to learn things and then go teach them or spread the news to others who also want to learn. So for example, if I attend a summit or a conference that's disability related, I can then go back to my local support group and share what I've learned at one of our meetings. I understand that rural areas are spread out and it can be hard to travel and communicate. If one person attends a meeting or a training, they can bring that information back to the community and share it with others. This is akin to passing along resources. Requesting that local libraries order and stock up a few up-to-date books on disability and advocacy is another way to make improvements in rural areas. Host a fundraiser in order to provide such materials for the library. That's another avenue. If your library has suitable books on disability, perhaps you and another self-advocate or two can get together, select your favorites, and then ask the library if you can create a display to showcase the books on disability for a week or a month, etc. Another idea is to design something educational about disability, such as a disability timeline, and ask the library if you can place it somewhere there, perhaps by their disability studies area, or even at the entrance. Go for the gold. It doesn't have to be a library. It could be any building that you feel is meaningful that you would like to help educate your community. Some people can, another way to get involved would be to volunteer to write for the local newspaper or your local blog or your local website. Perhaps you could have a weekly, monthly, or biannual column about disability. Maybe your group writes something together, or maybe it's just one person in one rural area writing something. If you can't get a column or some sort of writing space, perhaps you could ask to be interviewed so that you can feature what's important to you in the paper. A group of self-advocates who just form a peer-led group can be a great source of news and pride for a community. One of my favorite ways to create resources is to organize and set up a skill trade bulletin board at a community center or a library. You get some supplies together. You have to ask permission. If there's a space we can use in here for my self-advocacy group, we would like to set up what's called a skill trade bulletin board. This is a place where people can list what skills they have to trade. So for example, if it was me and I were involved in this, I could write down my name, that I have editing skills, cooking skills, babysitting skills, or whatever else, dance skills. I have ballet training. If somebody, anything that I can do that someone else wants to learn, these are the skills I'm willing to trade. So the idea is to create a board where people can list a skill and their phone number or their email next to their skill or some way to contact them. This can be a resource for the whole community to utilize. This doesn't have to be just something only for people with disabilities. It can be something that the whole community could use. And the point, of course, is to trade skills for needed services. That's a way to get around a community that's lacking support or lacking finances or just does not have what people with disabilities need. Skill trade can come to your rescue. Many people with disabilities in rural areas find that joining clubs of interest in their communities that serve people in various ways, aids breaking down social barriers and becoming a part of the societies in which they live. This can involve educating others about disability and addressing accessibility issues. However, getting out and about and meeting others can lead to resources. There's some things I'd like everyone to remember is that everyone has a purpose and deserves a chance to fulfill that purpose. Also, Jessica, are you able to hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. The interpreter had mentioned that there was a sound, so she was worried that we were possibly disconnected. Everyone, I am very close to wrapping this up and opening up for questions. On this Remember slide, I'd like to say everyone has a purpose and deserves a chance to fulfill that purpose. Purposes can grow and change over time, and like purposes, resources need to grow and change over time. People with disabilities know best what works and does not work for them. They have experience with many different situations and processes and understand what they need as far as accommodations and such. Silencing the voices of self-advocates and refusing to listen to their ideas, even if it's unintentional, goes against true access and inclusion for people with disabilities. People with disabilities have a lot to learn from each other. Information sharing changes lives and puts people in touch with one another via peer mentors and elders. What one self-advocate knows and can share can truly change the life of another self-advocate. Educating others that we are all dependent on each other, whether disability is present or not, is another important part of self-advocacy. For example, we all depend on stores to provide us with groceries. We depend on gas stations for our gas. We depend on schools and colleges to educate us, and so on and so on. People with disabilities, just like anyone else, have needs, and they also, just like everyone else, depend on others and their families and communities to help them. Just because a disability might not be universal to the whole of a community does not mean that equality and support should be a burden. That is an old, outdated way of looking at disability. National Youth Leadership Network recognizes and values youth. And so in big cities, youth in rural, and also in big cities, youth in rural areas with disabilities can make excellent peers and leaders in their communities. Last, I'd like to get to some resources before we open up for questions. There's the Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living, APRIL, a national membership organization dedicated to advancing the rights and responsibilities of people with disabilities in rural America. Their website address is up here. APRIL is the unified voice of independent living in rural America. They are really, truly back the mantra, I don't remember how to say that, nothing about us without us. I recommend checking out APRIL's Rural Transportation Voucher Project, as well as their work group that's tackling the next federal transportation bill. They've also got a lot of neat stuff going on, like promoting basic access for all new home construction. The Rural Assistance Center is another strong resource for people with disabilities in rural areas. They have information about independent living, Medicaid, community-based services waiver programs, rural schools, workforce, as well as transportation issues, housing assistance, and the ADA. There's Project Action, which touches on rural transportation resources, and that's up there as well. Job Accommodation Network is another mentionable resource, as they have a list of vocational rehabilitation centers around the state that you can search. There's the Research and Training Center on Disability in Rural Communities, also known as RTC Rural. They focus on community participation and independent living, employment and vocational rehabilitation, and health and wellness. They also have several projects, for example, evaluating community accessibility, peer support for rural mental health. Here's National Youth Leadership Network again. I understand that there are more national resources out there that I have not covered. I invite you listeners to share them during the Q&A session or just with your neighbors if you're listening in with someone else. And thank you ahead of time for jumping in to share. Let's go ahead and move into our Q&A, question and answer session.
Great. Thank you, Alicia. Let's see, Kristen has a question. It's, how can we get reliable transportation to small towns? Sometimes small towns are far away from the destinations we would like to get on.
Hello. So for transportation is, again, something I don't have magic answers for. However, there's, in the resources that I have, there check things like the Rural Assistance Center, Project Action, and a few of the other ones that I have listed. I suggest going there to, let me go back here, take another look at these right here. And it's the Project Action Research and Training Center on Disability in Rural Communities.
Great. Kara wanted to know, is it possible if we could get your contact information before the webinar ends?
Yes, my contact information, let me go to my beginning slide if it will let me. Oh, it's not going to let me. Okay, I'm going to say it out. It's my first name, E-L-E-S-I-A at NYLN.org. That's my email. You could also just look up National Youth Leadership Network, go to the staff page, and you'll find me.
Great. And I just typed that email out to everybody, so you'll see it. And you all will each get a copy of the recording and the PowerPoint as well, so you'll see that first slide in there. Karen wants to know, well, she says, whenever I think about accessibility plus accommodations, I'm struck by the fact that they benefit all populations, not just the disabled. How can we better communicate that to a broader audience?
I love that you said that. I love hearing that, and that's something that I touched on in this webinar. It's wonderful to hear it reverberating back from the audience. Advocacy is a huge way to keep getting that message out. I find that when I'm out and I'm doing advocacy work, I love pointing out, doesn't this help everybody else in the room? So for example, I'm extremely sensitive to fluorescent lighting. It's a disability-related issue. However, there's a lot of people without disabilities who are extremely sensitive to fluorescent lighting. So I almost always, when I'm at a meeting in person, I say, we've got to find a room that has natural light and plenty of it. And everyone else in the room is very thankful for that as well. A lot of things that help people with disabilities also end up helping people without disabilities, or just the population as a whole.
Great. Fong had a recommendation. He says, as far as transportation, you might check with United We Ride or United Cerebral Palsy Association, who work with transportation issues. So thank you for that suggestion.
Yes, thank you.
Rebecca had an idea that says, with just a thought, what about using websites like Craigslist and FreeCycle to offer services, rides, and items to those who need them?
I think that's an excellent idea, and I love that I've, got, at least one person in the audience, and I'm sure many more of you, thinking about ways that you can make this work, ways that you can reach out to others. I think it's an excellent idea. Just always exercise caution about the information that you provide about yourself. There's some people out there who don't have good intentions and who could, be someone you don't want to be around or associate with. So just be careful when you give out your personal information. However, I think that's an excellent idea, and I say go for it.
Great. Thanks. Well, that wraps it up for questions. Maybe we can give folks about 30 more seconds if any last ones want to come in. Oh, Rebecca wanted to also say that she uses those services. She just meets them at Target or something.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think we're all set. Did you have any last words or anything closing you want to say?
So this is the conclusion of my presentation. Again, thank you everyone for making the time to come and listen in today. I'm in hopes that everyone got a little something or even a big something to take away and act on or think about. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. You can, again, look me up through National Youth Leadership Network on the staff page. I would like to thank Jessica Keenan with National Consumer Law Center for moderating and organizing this webinar, as well as Karen Bosteen-Parr, I'm so sorry if I said your last name wrong, with Rural Exchange, and the folks at National Alliance for Rural People, including Olga Cardoso. Best wishes, everyone, for a lovely Tuesday. Thank you for listening to me, and goodbye.
Great. Thank you so much. Just to wrap it up, I wanted to show people the Rural Exchange website, and they also have a Facebook page. They'll continue to post updates and follow-up discussions related to this webinar, and there'll be the materials there as well. Just a reminder, please do the evaluation. You just exit out. It'll pop up on your screen. Disable any pop-up blockers if you have them. Tomorrow I'll email you where you can access the PowerPoint and the recording. And thank you so much to our audience today and to our excellent speaker today, Alicia. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.